Good morning. I hope everyone had a chance to enjoy the keynote speaker this morning. I am your room host, Josh Halibichuk, and this is Making Your Vote Count. It's the first of two sessions this morning. During our session today, if you have any questions or comments, you can submit them in the Whova chat, which should be to the right of your video. We ask, obviously, that attendees keep discussion on topic and respectful. And if you miss part of this session or you miss any other session happening at this time, they will all be recorded and posted later at iowaideas.com. And then on social media, you can use the Iowa Ideas 2020 hashtag if you want to share any takeaways or thoughts that you have about the conference. And that content and the content we're creating here will be used as part of the Gazette's Iowa Ideas content throughout the next couple months. And now I will turn the session over to our moderator, Craig Gemoules.
Thank you, Josh. My name is Craig Gemoules, and I'm the managing editor of the Gazette newspaper. And our topic today is making your vote count. If for some reason or another you joined us by mistake, you meant to go to a different session, you're more than welcome to stay in this panel. I will remind you that it's not like getting in the wrong airplane at the airport. Your luggage is not going to go to Hawaii and you to Peoria. You can stay along for the whole ride with us, and we'd be glad to have you. As Josh said, our goal today is to have a civilized conversation about elections. I know those two things don't work often in the same sentence. You don't hear them very often, but that's our goal today. And our overall goal is to look at all the factors that come into play in voting and making your voice count. And in this whirlwind of an election we have going on right now. We'll be joined shortly by another panelist. He's running a couple of minutes late, so I'm sorry we're also running a little bit late because of that. He is joining us now. So let me introduce our panel. We're very lucky to have two experts whose insight and expertise is going to help us in this conversation. One of them is Chris Larimer. He's a political science professor at the University of Northern Iowa. He's an author of a book about the gubernatorial stability in Iowa. You know, I grew up thinking that Robert D. Ray was the only governor there ever was in Iowa. And then Terry Branstad came along and made him look like a short timer. You may know Chris from, he's often quoted in the Gazette newspaper and other publications as well for his insights on voter turnout and the social pressures. And our other panelist is Iowa Secretary of State Paul Pate. He's a former state senator, former mayor of our own Cedar Rapids. He's now in his third term as Secretary of State. And he's been living and breathing elections for quite some time, to say the least. So those are our two panelists today. And I want to go ahead and get started here. Welcome, both of you. Chris, I'm going to start with you first this is elections coming up quickly. The seasons are changing. I actually heard on the radio this morning that we might actually get a wintry mix tomorrow morning, which I'm not ready for. But it seems like it's appropriate for the slush that's going around this election cycle. There's all kinds of rumors. We've heard about foreign intervention. And so there's a level of angst that people have about whether their vote is going to count or not. Chris, I wonder if you could just kind of set the stage for us a little bit. What swirling pressures do you see out there? What are you're hearing on campus? And what effect do you think that might have on turnout?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Craig. Yeah, it's a good question. I think, you know, in addition to all of the things that we expected going into this election cycle in terms of, you know, a heightened level of polarization, you know, the raw partisanship that we've observed over the last couple of election cycles, What's unique, I think, at least in modern presidential history, to this particular election cycle is the narrative and the level of discussion surrounding simply the act of voting itself. And there has been a lot of discussion about, just the process of voting, how the voting process actually works once you cast your ballot. And as a result of that, there have been a lot of questions raised about the integrity of the election process. A lot of people have a heightened level of anxiety surrounding just the simple act of casting a ballot. And as I said, that is unique, and we obviously don't know what effect that is going to have on turnout just yet. We've obviously seen an increase in the use of absentee and mail-in ballots related to the pandemic, and Secretary Pate will obviously be able to talk about that in more depth than I can. But on top of that, there's all this discussion and the surrounding narrative about the integrity of the election. And there is some research out there that suggests when you start to dilute voters' confidence in elections, they may be less likely to participate in the political process. And I think that's one of the real dangers here, right? I mean, another stream of research shows that once people vote once, it's more likely to become a habit. And so if you have a narrative around this particular election cycle where you're raising questions in voters' minds about whether or not they should vote, whether or not their ballot is going to be kept secret, whether or not their ballot is going to be counted accurately, then they are in turn less likely to vote. That's real troublesome, because then that set in place a lifelong pattern of questions about participating in the political process. So we don't yet know, but what we know from existing research suggests that this is quite concerning going forward.
Thank you. Let me ask the follow up on that with Secretary Pate. Welcome, Paul. You've really been immersed in election security issues, to say the least, especially over the last 4 years. A lot of them have been technical improvements, probably. I just wonder if what we're seeing now is another layer that's not really technical in nature, that can't be fixed by a security patch or something like that. It's Twitter, it's Facebook, it's social media pressures. It's a different kind of election security, if you will. I just wonder kind of how your office is responding to both of these aspects of voting integrity, the technical issue of it, and I guess for lack of a better word, the social issue of it.
Certainly. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. It's a great format, and looking forward to our dialogue. In answer to your question, yes, cybersecurity clearly is still a top priority, will remain so. We build a lot of great partnerships with our people out there, both the federal levels, our state and private sectors, and Iowans can feel pretty good about that. We've got their back with a lot of checks and balances and various other technology. But the real battlefront we're facing now is misinformation and disinformation. It's a very serious one. We saw it in 2016, and we're going to continue to combat that. There's no evidence that any Russians hacked a single vote technically in our system, but they have had a very successful battle, they and the Chinese and the Iranians, at putting out propaganda or misinformation and trying to create doubt in the voters' minds. And that's the last thing we want. The integrity of our system is so important. This election is over on November 3rd. We want people to be confident that the results are accurate. But what they're doing is putting a lot of things out there to start creating that doubt. So they'll start saying, well, it's not my senator, it's not my legislator, it's not my president. And we've got to combat that. So we encourage people to go to trusted sources like my offices, or if they see something that sounds a little strange, they please verify it. Don't go with it just because it was put on a blog site or put out in some form on the media that you may have some doubt about. So it is the battlefront we're facing. It's not going away. It's definitely the hot spot.
It's when you talk about Russia and China and Iran, those are very worrisome, obviously, factors in the election. But we ourselves have been to blame for this as well, causing some misinformation. And I can't help but notice that President Trump has tweeted several times about there are 80 million unsolicited ballots being sent out in the country. But Iowa doesn't send out unsolicited ballots, right? Can you walk us through that process a little bit about if somebody wanted to have their vote count by voting absentee? What is the process of course, that's going on right now.
Right.
But for people who've not done it before, what is the process that people go through to get a ballot?
We're very fortunate. This is not a new thing for Iowans. They've always liked choices, whether it's voting in person or absentee. We don't call it vote by mail because it's not being sent unsolicited. You as an individual should, if it's an option you wish to pursue, you can request an absentee ballot. And there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can go to your county auditor's website or the Secretary of State's website, and there's a form on there that you can download and fill out and send it in. The other things that you encountered was my office sent statewide. We sent out an official absentee ballot request form over Labor Day weekend, and some counties did as well around the state. That the auditors did, and there are a lot of other groups that are doing it. And trust me, I get a lot of people contacting me when I'm out there going, "How many of these absentee ballot request forms are you all going to send?" And I tell them, "Well, no, we're only sending you one, but consider it a privilege because everybody wants to invite you to vote." So they're doing this. The challenge is some of those groups, even with the best intentions, aren't getting it right. They've misrepresented some of the facts, or they are mailing it to people who aren't actually still living in that area because their list is old or something. So again, for you, the voter, your best option is to go to your county auditor's website or the Secretary of State's. You can get a form there and you can fill that out and send it in. And you can track it right online at my website, Secretary of State's, and you can catch that with voterready.iowa.gov. And you can track when they get your absentee ballot request form. It'll tell you when they mail you your ballot. It will tell you when they actually receive it back after you return your ballot.
So in Iowa, you have to request a ballot. And Iowa's not one of the states that sends out a ballot just in the mail and says, "Here you go." You have to request it. And we'll go through deadlines more later on, but I want to make sure that since we're talking about absentee ballots at this point, people have until October 24th to request an absentee ballot. So you wouldn't have to necessarily go on election day to cast a vote. You could do it beforehand.
The auditor does need it by the 24th. Literally, they need to have it in their office, not just so they can be successful in getting it mailed to you on a timely basis. I would mention people can still vote early by going in person to their county auditor's office still, if for some reason this doesn't work for them.
So let's say you request a ballot. You've sorted through all these different solicitations that are out there from auditors in your office and private groups, and you've requested the ballot and you've got one in the mail. How do you know that ballot is the real deal, and when you send it back, it's going to actually go where it's supposed to go, and it's not going to go to like the Politburo in Russia? How do you know it's the real deal, and when do you have to turn it back in by?
I've never heard of an incident of anyone doing that, knock on wood. I don't want that to happen, but you can look at usually the auditors will post on their website, and frankly, the Gazette has been very good about posting sample election ballots, so you'll kind of know what they look like. But it'll say right on the envelope as an official election mail authorized by the United States Postal Service. That's one of the best ones. And back to what I said earlier, you can track it online by going to our website, so you'll know if they mailed you a ballot. And then when you do fill it out, making sure that the return address that you're sending it back to is your Linn County, in Linn County's case, your Linn County Auditor's Office. And then you can look online to check to make sure they received it back. There's a way to assure yourself that it was legitimate and that they got it and they're going to process it.
And those have to, if you're going to send them back in, they have to be postmarked by November 2nd. Is that right?
That's correct. And we were the first state in the country to mandate what we call they're actually mail barcodes that are on there. So the postal system will register in their data system immediately when you drop it into a mail service. We'll know exactly the day. We don't use the whole postmark idea anymore. This is much more accurate, and it assures us that we know who's been voting on time.
Yeah, I want to talk about this some more, but let me set the stage for that a little bit more here. Going back to Chris, we probably all remember, maybe too well, House 55 from a couple years ago, where they did not use the intelligent barcodes. They weren't required to at the time, if I remember. And I learned something new out of that. I didn't realize that the post office didn't postmark every single letter that went through. I guess that's routine. I didn't know that. There was a discrepancy or an argument that went to the state legislature to figure out whether these late ballots were going to be counted or not. Chris, do you know, I'm just kind of curious, are there any lessons to be drawn from that whole debate that went on in House District 55, State House District 55, in terms of making your vote count?
Well, you know, and I don't recall all the details related to that, but I think what Secretary Pate has been talking about, I think, you know, one of the lessons is if you do have an election cycle like we do right now, where there is that heightened sense of anxiety about whether or not your vote will count, is just the importance of putting in as many safeguards in as you can. And you know, that starts with, you know, just how the piece of mail looks, as Secretary Pate was saying, it in terms of the labels that are going to be on it. But then also, I think most importantly is that people have a sense that they can track where it goes, and what the Secretary of State's office has been doing in terms of allowing voters to track their absentee ballot request and then track them once they send it in. I think that helps reassure voters, because that's one of the questions that I've heard more this election cycle than any other is, you know, people asking if they send their ballot in, do they have to be worried about being counted, or they're worried about sending it through the mail. They just want to take it down to their county auditor's office and just hand it in personally. I think, you know, anything you can do to reassure voters that the process is working as it should be and as it has for several election cycles. I know here in Black Hawk County, our county auditor has put out press releases talking about the conversations they've had with their local United States Postal Service office, just to reassure voters that they have the capabilities to process the thousands of ballots that will be coming in. And you know, I think those type of safeguards are extremely important as far as the lessons learned, is that if there is any concern, if you have an election like this, which was already going to be unusual, as I said, due to the pandemic, that you put in as many safeguards as you can.
There's a lot to unpack here, but getting back to the question of you know, working with the post office and whether or not people need to physically go in and do something or mail it in, or how can you be sure and track it? President Trump has tweeted that advising voters that they should go to the polls on election day and ask the poll workers if their absentee ballots have been counted, and if the poll worker doesn't know the answer to it or gives an inconclusive answer, they should vote again. Should Iowans do that?
Well, I certainly don't think they need to do that here because of the fact we have the tracking system. I think that's the best method to do it. We're trying to avoid long lines. We're trying to create a safe and good experience for those who go to the polls on election day, and adding more people to a line that doesn't necessarily have to happen, I think is beneficial. We've got a good track record in Iowa, so I think we can be comfortable that if you look at the website and see it, or if you want to call your auditor's office prior to that, I personally suggest the going online so we can streamline the process. And again, we got plenty of time. If you cast your ballot now, you can verify that the county auditor got it, so you don't have to be thinking about it on election day.
I want to get back to that in a minute, but let me backtrack a little bit to the intelligent barcode, because Iowa is the first state in the union that has done that. But I think that's one of a host of security measures that you've been working on for a while. And without getting too deep in the weeds, because I know you live and breathe this more than any of us do, but we're all concerned about it. I wonder if you could kind of give us a little bit of a run through in terms of over the last few years, kind of how the Iowa election process has been fortified, solidified, and you obviously have a level of comfort that it's a high level of comfort that it's, you know, it's going to be fine, that the system is fine. Help everybody else get that level of comfort and talk us through kind of what the high levels of things that have happened in the last few years that you've done, your office has done to help solidify the process here in Iowa.
Certainly. And I just would start by telling you that this cyber front is something that's still relatively new. We've always dealt with cybersecurity in a sense of making sure, you know, we had some firewalls in place, things like that. But I think with the advent of 2014, about in that period, all the states in the United recognize that this game has been, the stakes have been raised. So we've had to be much more aggressive in partnering with both our National Homeland Security, our Iowa Homeland Security, the FBI. We even work with the National Guard cyber team, and we work with, of course, our own team. I've, have added additional staff who are in the cyber world to constantly monitor every day. Multiple firewalls and antivirus systems are in place. We have we do weekly scans of the system, watch for bad actors. But even before this all came, we had thousands a day of people trying to kind of call knock on your door to look at ways to try to get into your system. Most of those folks were trying to steal things. They wanted to steal information. You do the same thing in the private sector, and we have to deflect those. Cybersecurity is like a long distance race without a finish line. You can't rest any day at all. You have to keep fighting that. So we've got all these partnerships put in place, and just recently we announced we were one of the first states to bring in the private sector, call them the white hat guys, to do a look at our system. And we are having that done on a regular basis. So we've got a lot of people from different sides looking at our processes to assure everybody what's going on. The bottom line is, in Iowa, we vote with paper ballots still. And that's our ace in the hole. You can't hack a paper ballot. We have got your back in that regard. So I think that's a strong measure. We have post-election audits, of course, and we have voter ID. We have bipartisan Republican Democrat poll workers. So you've got that and the transparency. We truly try to give you every one of those protections for your benefit. Even with all of those things I just said, there can be moments when people might misunderstand something if they don't know what's going on. And that's why we still encourage them to reach out and ask if they think something is not comfortable to them. But again, we have a great track record, and we're going to build on that as we go forward.
Tell me about or tell us about the intelligent barcode a little bit more, because
Sure.
That's been one of the big features that I think will should give people, I guess, a level of comfort that if they send a ballot in, it's going to be tracked and counted. Tell us a little bit about how that works.
Well, as you mentioned, when we had the challenge in the House district race, it got to be concerning because there was no postmarks, and the fact that some people misunderstood some of the things that were being marked on an envelope, thinking, well, that's a postmark. Well, no, it wasn't. So there's a small cost involved in doing this, and we worked it out with the postal system. And it's just basically, most of you are familiar with the barcode. It's on every consumer product you get almost nowadays at the store. There's that barcode. Those are pre-printed on there so that when it goes into the postal system, they scan every single piece of mail, every single one of them. And that barcode goes into our ability to be able to track it for us as well as the postal office to know what day it went into the system. So there won't be any of these question marks about, well, was it postmarked on the 2nd of November? Was it postmarked on the 3rd, 4th, or 5th? We'll have that information available to us, particularly for those who straggle in after the official election day on the 3rd. It's, I think, a great thing. We should have done it a long time ago, but technology sometimes takes a while to, for us all to catch up with it.
Let me ask both of you a question here about what process are you personally using to vote this time? Are you voting absentee? Going to wait till election day? What are you personally? What process are you personally, each of you, following?
Wait, Christopher. No, you go first, Chris.
Sorry. I actually cast my ballot last weekend, Saturday. We had early voting up in the Dome here in Cedar Falls for Blackhawk County. And so I went and cast my ballot in person early using early voting and wanted to see what it looked like because we sometimes have that on campus as well. And we've had it in our student union, but for social distancing purposes, they moved everything to the Dome to kind of spread it out. So I did it last Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
And for myself, being in Des Moines, working the elections, I've been voting absentee. Typically, I would vote absentee in person at the courthouse. This year, I'm doing it via the mail, and I'm still looking at my ballot, to be very honest with everybody. There's more than just the president and the U.S. Senate race on there. When you start looking at the district, the judges, and some of the other positions. So even your Secretary of State, has to do his homework and look down through those individual offices before I cast my ballot.
Well, there is a lot on the ballot this time, and like I think most general elections, there is quite a bit. Chris, can you talk to us a little bit about kind of what you see as the stakes in this election? Obviously, we are all focused on the presidential election, but we also have potential control of the Capitol, both in Washington and in Des Moines. Can you take a minute to just kind of walk us through kind of what the stakes of this election are and why it's so important to so many people?
Yeah, well, I mean, the stakes of any election are always high because, the old saying, elections have consequences, and they really do in terms of the direction of public policy. But, particularly for voters in Iowa's first congressional district, where I am, and voters really in all four, but certainly voters in this first congressional district in Iowa, I was looking a couple of weeks ago. To my knowledge, and this may have changed by now, but to my knowledge, if you're in the first congressional district, you have something that's unique to the rest of the country in that the first three races you are voting for have consistently been ranked as toss-ups. I was using Cook Political Report to look up the ratings of various races. So the presidential race, the U.S. Senate race, and the first congressional district race, at least as a couple of weeks ago, all three were rated as toss-ups. And as I was looking, that was the only congressional district in the country where that was the case. Now, some of these, the ratings on some of these races change, and certainly the second and third congressional districts are going to be extremely competitive as well. And so if you're in one of those three districts, or even the fourth district, the first 2 to 3 races you're voting in are extraordinarily competitive. The entire country is looking at them. All the national media are looking at these races. So you're in a very unique position because we always hear about, how 90% of U.S. House incumbents are reelected on a regular basis. There are always questions about, well, does my vote really matter? Yes, it absolutely does. And that's one of the selling points I try to pitch to students is that you are in a very unique position here in terms of voting for very, very competitive races. It's certainly the stakes are high for all three of those races, whether it's the presidential race, the U.S. Senate race, or one of those 4 U.S. House races. But as you said, even when you get down to the state legislative level, certainly for the Iowa House, where the margin is relatively narrow, there are going to be some very competitive races there as well. And there are political scientists who rate the likelihood of state legislative chambers flipping from one party control to the other. And the Iowa House is one of those that's sort of on the border of being a toss-up, according to some political scientists who look at this, that it's, right now maybe leans Republican, but it could be inching closer to a toss-up. So as you move down the ballot, whatever level you're looking at, the stakes are very high because, as I said, all of these have significant consequences for the direction of public policy.
Just to clarify here quickly, just so everybody knows, the first district, we're talking about the 3 uncontested races are Trump and Biden for president, Ernst and Greenfield for Senate, and Finkenauer and Hinson for 1st District U.S. House. Just for clarification there. Let me, Secretary Pate, let me ask you a question here about, we're talking a lot about technology and cybersecurity and those sorts of things. What about the old-fashioned technology, humans? Are we going to have enough poll workers on election day to staff the polls and keep the lines somewhat manageable if a lot of people show up there?
The answer to your question is yes. We've got a lot of great folks who have been a part of this process, and those new faces are joining us. But it's been a challenge for a long time. It just got a little tougher with the COVID challenge that we've been in the middle of. One of the things I was concerned about back in March was, look, most of our poll workers are seniors, and they are the higher risk population in this COVID pandemic we're in the middle of. So we took it on ourselves to work with the county auditors and reach out to you, the public, and ask you, would you mind stepping up and helping fill the gap so some of these seniors could perhaps take a break during this particular crisis we're faced with. And we were very pleased with the results. Back in the primary, we found over 1,000 people who were interested in being a part of that. But coming into this general election, we knew we were going to need well over 10,000 when you're talking about a statewide, and we felt we needed to open as many polling sites as possible. In the primary, we consolidated. But going into this fall, we've identified over 11,000 total poll workers and or people interested in being a poll worker. We've asked the county auditors if they need any additional help. We're doing targeted social media recruiting still, but the feedback's been very positive. We've gotten a good response, but we could always use a few more, because we actually would like to have extra poll worker staff just to ensure safe distancing at the polling sites, a few other non-traditional positions we don't always use. And for your viewers right now joining us, a poll worker they have various responsibilities. It is a paid position. They do everything from signing you in and greeting you as you come in. We have nice sophisticated laptops, we call them e-poll books, that has all the information in there. They look your name up when you come in to make sure you should be where you're at and help you get through the voting. Someone might be, other poll workers assisting you with your voting, the machines we have there, and the collection of your ballot. And then we also have curbside voting. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but those poll workers actually help with that as well. And we need a Republican Democrat team to balance it out, as we talked earlier about. So those are the folks that do it, and we spend a lot of time training them. We put together a training program that the auditors then utilize that and personalize it. So they're all getting that opportunity to be fully informed and prepared for what they might encounter on November 3rd.
So if somebody wants to be a poll worker, you're obviously still looking for them. If somebody is interested, what should they do? Contact the county auditor or?
Sure. The county auditor is the quickest way, but if one thing about today's technology, if you just want to go on site, again, you can go to our voterready.iowa.gov site, and there's a place there. You can fill it out, and then we'll make sure your contact information gets to the auditor of your county, and they'll reach back out to you.
For people who are actually voting, sending the ballot through the mail instead of actually physically going either to turn it in now or vote on election day, Paul, you've been talking with on and off with the mail system. Can you make us privy to kind of what your conversations have been, and what is the level of comfort that the public should have that the mail system is up to the task?
I appreciate that question, because this is back to we talked earlier about misinformation being an issue. The postal thing got into such a political hot potato that it, to my opinion, clouded the facts. For Iowa, we have a great track record with our postal system here. We have a good relationship. This is called the Hawkeye District. They have one of the best service ratings of the postal systems across the country. But just to put it in perspective, what the post office services just per day in the United States for volume, if every single eligible voter in the country chose to vote in one day by mail, still would not equal what the post office does normally. So this isn't a lot of extra volume. What it really is about making sure that it gets the tender loving care we want it to have. And I was involved in a dialogue with the United States Postmaster several weeks ago on a virtual meeting. And when he was asked specifically, where are we at? What's the priority of our elections mail? He made a commitment unequivocally that the elections mail would be the top priority of their system. It would be processed. And a few of our county auditors have done their own test of mailing pieces out to see how long it takes to get to their courthouse. And the results were positive almost overnight. Now, I'll caution, those days are kind of gone, folks. I'm not taking that. You really need to allow safe time margins in there to get it out there. That's what the IMB code is about too, to ensure we know when you put it in the system. So I'm comfortable. We have regular dialogues with the local postmasters. We monitor the processes, and again, everything's been very positive.
Staying on mail-in ballots for a minute here. The law allows, or I guess it's true in all absentee ballots, the law allows county auditors to start counting those, processing those the day before the election, right? But not announcing them until the polls have closed the next day. You went to the Legislative Council and got permission to also help the auditors prepare a little bit earlier than normal by opening, kind of sorting out the mail here and opening not the secrecy envelope with the ballot in it, but just preparing the ballot beforehand or to be ready to be counted as soon as they can actually count it. Do you foresee that being a legal issue in the future? Have you heard any swirlings around that's going to come back to bite the county auditors at some point, that, hey, they opened up the ballots earlier than they should have?
No, we don't. This is not a new thing. We've done this in the past periodically. We've always done the day before, given the county auditors in a general election. Mm-hmm. And so we have safeguards. So I feel are good that the courts would honor what we're doing. And for your folks watching this, what we did this year is we've extended them the ability to open that outer envelope, try to get some of the time-consuming procedures out of the way. But when they're doing that, again, they have transparency there. That we have teams there watching how the process is going, and they have secrecy envelopes, so your ballot is still not being shown. It's still got that secrecy component. And then on Monday before the election is when they can start putting it into a tabulating machine. Again, there's transparency. There's a Republican and Democrat there monitoring it, but never do they tabulate, meaning we don't know a number total. When they finish their counting or tabulating on a Monday, they won't know. And they still do that on Tuesdays, actually, too, because if they have a lot of them, they'll keep doing it. That, to me, is a plus to make sure for those of you who are wanting those results Tuesday night, when you're talking about 60, 70, 80, could be as high as 80 in some counties, % of the people voting absentee, those will be tabulated. So you'll have the preliminary results.
What is happening right now with early voting? In the primary, we saw record turnout, and looks like we're on track for that this time. Are the numbers bearing that out to this point, that despite all the swirling rumors that are out there, that turnout is actually doing pretty well?
Yes. Presidential elections, we tend to have a higher turnout than your non-elect presidential years. We're over 750,000 folks who are using the absentee approach. And when you look at about 2 million active registered voters, and there are probably a few more than that, 750,000 before we get done here.
If somebody waits till election day to go vote, and they don't do the absentee thing, they go to the poll. Walk us through for a minute, just kind of what to expect at the poll. What happens if somebody say this is somebody's first time voting? Mm-hmm. What will they see there, and what will be expected of them?
Certainly. Well, first, I encourage people to have what we call a vote plan, and it starts with making sure you're registered. And you can do that right now by going online and doing it. If you have an Iowa driver's license, you can do it that way. Otherwise, there's a paper process you can print out and do so, or you can register on election day. So we're talking about election day. If you're one of those folks who hasn't already been registered in Iowa, and you bring your Iowa driver's license and you'd be able to register. If you happen to be someone who is in the process and maybe you haven't got your license converted over, you have another state's license, you can use that, but you also have to have proof of residency, like a bank statement or something like that. It proves you live at your home. You can also use an attester. I don't want to complicate get in the weeds, but I think you need to know it's that simple. But for those of you coming in to vote, I'd recommend you go to our website again and make sure you confirm where your polling location is, because we've consolidated some of those with the COVID challenge. So by going to that voterready.iowa.gov site, you can just type in your address and it will find your precinct for you and will then tell you where you're voting. So let's make sure you're at the right place. And now your polling hours are from 7 in the morning till 9 o'clock. So by coming in with your ID card, your voter ID card, or your driver's license. Most people in Iowa use a driver's license because that's the more common one and most accessible one. If you don't have one, ask your county auditor. Again, the website I've mentioned, have that. You show up, park your vehicle, come on in. Some precincts will have a greeter there. You'll have safe distancing markers on the ground showing you kind of like where we want you to stand so no one feels uncomfortable. When they get up to the first poll worker, they'll ask you for that ID and they'll put that ID number into their laptop, and up on the screen will say, "Hello, Mr. Pate." It'll tell us I'm the guy. They'll be able to verify all the particulars, get you a ballot in your hand, and then you will go to the voting tables they have set up, cast your ballot, in turn come back, and it will be put into the tabulating machine while you're there. And maybe some of the counties are even giving vote stickers out so you can say, "I voted today," and you will have completed your task.
Will people showing up at the polls on election day, will they have to wear masks to get in?
It's not required that they wear a mask. Obviously, I'll say I'd prefer they did. The poll workers themselves will be wearing masks, and face shields will be available to them. We provided a significant amount of protective equipment it was 2,500 gallons roughly of hand sanitizer across the state, and thousands of face masks and other types of material they might need to make sure the voting site is safe for poll workers and for voters.
And inside the polls, the voters will be socially distanced, I assume.
Most certainly, and they'll be cleaning the polling site consistently throughout the day.
Speaking of first-time voters, Chris, my guess is your students probably, a lot of them are first or soon to be first-time voters. What are you hearing from in your classes? What kind of questions are students asking about this election?
Yeah, well, let me say also that, that demographic, that 18 to 24-year-old demographic, to me is one of the more interesting ones to watch this election cycle. We saw there was a considerable uptick in the 2018 midterm election for 18 to 24-year-olds compared to the previous midterm election in 2014. And so, the extent to which young voters are getting engaged in the political process is obviously always an interesting one. Back to my earlier point about, that voting can have this what scholars call a habit forming effect. There were already several questions surrounding the election cycle for these potential first-time voters with the pandemic and how it was going to work. And then on top of that, the narrative that we've been talking about this entire panel session about, election security and really psychological security. A lot of the questions that students are asking are the ones that we're talking about right now in terms of, they're asking those psychological questions. Can I trust that my ballot will be delivered on time? Can I trust that my vote will count? So they have, as citizens who have never engaged or had a chance to participate in the political process through voting, there was already a level of uncertainty there. And then you add on top of that the narrative surrounding this election cycle. So they are asking those basic questions about just trust and integrity in the voting process.
And is that a discussion, or is that something you're answering to them, or is it just like questions, rhetorical questions they're posing? I'm just kind of curious how that conversation ends up if people pose those questions.
Yeah, no, they're very specific questions, and I do, to my best of my ability, answer them as specifically as possible, because I recognize how important it is that they do feel that sense of ease with the voting process itself. As I said, because I want that first experience for those students to be a positive one, so that they continue to be voters in subsequent elections. And so a lot of it is using what the information that Secretary Pate has highlighted during this panel, in terms of going to the Iowa Secretary of State's website, talking about the ballot tracking process, how that works, going through the voter registration process, going through all the steps that Secretary Pate just talked about in terms of what students can expect when they show up at the polls, or even what they can expect when they have to register to vote, and then going through the entire voting process, talking about the ballot, directing them to county auditor websites, or directing them to either one of those websites to make sure they know where their polling location is. So it's certainly not a philosophical discussion. It very much is a practical discussion to try to give those students as much concrete information as I can, not only so that they're doing the right things on election day in terms of what they need to bring with them, but also just so that it's a positive overall experience for young first-time voters.
Speaking of that, Secretary Pate, I want to go through the upcoming deadlines one more time, and the trusted resources that people should look for if they have questions. Rather than me go through what I think I'm right on the deadlines, but I'd rather have it come from you so I don't mistake it. Can you kind of walk us through what is upcoming, what important deadlines are coming up for requesting absentee ballots, sending them in, voting, when they have to be there, that sort of thing. And then once again, remind us where to go to track our ballots, and where we can go to get more information.
Well, the key one is this week, and that's the October 24th, which is Saturday. And that's our the cutoff. That's when the auditors need to have these absentee ballot request forms in, if you're going to do that. That's the key one. Then after that, we will be looking at absentee ballots that you're sending in. The actual absentee ballot needs to be postmarked by the 2nd of November. So you want to get it into a postal system somewhere before that. And I just encourage people, be safe. Don't wait till November 2nd to do it. Let's get your ballot, spend some time going over it and filling that out. The polls themselves are on November 3rd, of course, and they open at 7 in the morning and they go to 9. And I keep putting out that one website, but it's the voterready.iowa.gov. It's got everything in there from it'll lead you to where the list of where your voting sites are at. It'll have information on how to register to vote. It'll have information on there for you if you have concerns about the safety of voting, what your options are, because you still can vote in person at the county courthouse, and they will be open on Saturday before the election as well for those who want to come in and vote in that respect. And we also have curbside voting. I want to put a plug in there for those with some disabilities. You can come to the polling site and there'll be a designated sign up right in front of the building where it's voting at, and you'll call that cell number and they'll send a team of 2 out to your car to assist you with voting in that regard too. So those are kind of the options, and those are the key dates you want to keep in mind.
Do you think for the people who are very eager to see what's happening with the presidential race, what's happening with control of Congress, State House, are you confident or not, or questioning whether we will have those answers on election night, or whether it will be sometime?
Well, I'm comfortable with what we're doing here in Iowa because of the way we do our absentee balloting. It's a lot different than states who do vote by mail. That's a different approach. They have a much steeper mountain decline, if you will, to get those all processed and give you those kind of results you might want on election night. And what we've seen in these past election cycles is a much tighter margin of victory for some of these higher attention-getting offices that are out there. I do not see this as an election similar to the Bush-Gore era of the hanging Chad type scenario at all. But, let's first tell you that, the historically perspective is only in recent years, because we have all the media opportunities did we even get out there trying to report who the winner was on election night? The famous Dewey front page story reminds us of how hard it is to get all those numbers to meet the deadlines we want to put out there on the media side and the public's demand. But for Iowa, I'm pretty comfortable that I'll be going to bed that night knowing how we see the election. It'll be preliminary because we still have time for absentees to come in the mail, and we have the audit procedures and those certifications before we'll get out there and tell the world it's official. But when you look at the country, you're going to have some states that are probably going to be a little tighter, and there's also the time difference. We start going out west, so if you're all hoping to have the whole national results by 10 o'clock, I think you might want to pop some popcorn and kick back because it might be a little longer wait.
Chris, let me ask you, as a political scientist, what are you going to be watching this? What are the key things you're going to be watching this election to see whether they might be harbingers for the future?
Well, certainly, as I mentioned, one of the things is just always watching youth voter turnout, that 18 to 24-year-old demographic, just to see the extent to which young people are engaged in the political process, to try to get a sense if there's any sort of movement there with that demographic, the demographic that typically is the hardest to mobilize relative to older demographics. So certainly watching that, watching the method by which voters use, or the method that which voters use to actually cast their ballot, looking at trends in the use of absentee ballots. That's been increasing over the last several election cycles, to try to get a sense of, what that trend continues to look like. And this year will be a little bit different. And obviously, in addition to just simply the raw results and trying to interpret trends and party control, whether it's at the state house or at the federal level, those things are also important. I'm also going to be trying to just get us some sort of understanding, and this will be after the election, of how the campaign actually worked, right? Because with this election cycle, with the pandemic, we've essentially removed that personal connection between the candidate and the voter, or made it much more difficult. And that's typically the most effective in terms of getting people out to vote. And so talking to campaigns after the election is over about how they had to sort of change their message to try to reach voters in an effective way that actually got them to go out and vote.
Thank you. I have one more question, then I just want to wrap it up a little bit. Secretary Pate, you're not on the ballot this time. Your term is up in what, 2 years? Is that right?
Correct.
Are you going to run again?
You want the scoop here?
We all do. We all do.
Talk to me after I have a chance to decompress from this election. I do want to throw a plug in for Christopher's comment about the young people, because we have record numbers of young people registering now, and we're doing a youth straw poll next week across the state in the high schools, and we've done this in the past, and I was always impressed with the results. They're pretty accurate. They truly do reflect what you're going to see on November 3rd. So kind of stay tuned on that one, folks, as it comes around. But the number one thing that we ask these young people, how do you make up your mind and who influences you? And the answer? Their parents. And I'm pleased to hear that. But, we think today of social media and peers, that would be it. But young people are going to be the unknown quantity this coming election.
Well, thank you very much. The beginning of your answer there is what we in the news business call a no comment. But I want to thank both of our panelists for being with us today, and we're very lucky to have both of you share your insights with us. And we're delighted to have you here. And feel free to check out the rest of the Iowa Ideas Symposium that goes through tomorrow as well. For people who are watching us, if you're staying with the infrastructure track, the next session is on derecho response, emergency storm response, and that will include the Cedar Rapids Fire Chief, who was the incident commander after the derecho, the Lynn County Emergency Management Coordinator, and Craig Fugate, who used to be the FEMA director. In a past life, I have lived in Florida most of my career. And he was a hurricane czar in Florida under many different governors. And I think that will prove to be a very interesting panel if you want to stick around for that one. If you're jumping tracks, and for some reason you wanted to stay with me, I'm moderating a panel in the next 15 minutes on rural healthcare issues, which is a matter that's very near and dear to a lot of us in Iowa. So with that, I just want to again thank the panelists for being with us, Secretary Pate and Professor Larimer. And especially I want to thank our sponsors for making the Iowa Ideas come true. We've been doing this since 2017. This is the first time we've done it virtually. So it's a little bit new to all of us, but it seems to be like it's going pretty well as far as I can tell. So thank you very much, and I will see you later.
Thank you.